In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can tell the difference between ENFP and ENTP using real-life examples and practical observations. Starting with ENFP, the first thing you're going to notice, probably, and the thing that's most apparent when you're talking to an ENFP, is they like to engage in a lot of exploratory conversation. So they like to jump from idea to idea based upon whatever they're passionate about at that moment. In this way, a lot of the time, they're going to be that friend that you have that's introducing new topics and a lot of new fads and things that are kind of out there in terms of pop culture a lot of the time that they know about before it catches on, and they're really interesting in that area. You might also notice that, especially if you speak to someone that's ENFP for a while and you've seen them in a lot of different environments and circumstances, you'll notice that from time to time, they're gonna really have these focused self-reflection episodes where they're going to be focusing on emotional content. Also, when you're speaking to someone that's ENFP, you're gonna be probably having a lot of creative discussions with them because that's just what they like to do. That's an activity that they're very frequently involved in. But the other side to that is that you're not going to really hear them make a lot of strict definitions and use too much logic. And that's not to say that ENFPs aren't smart or anything like that. It's just that they prefer to appeal to people's emotions than to appeal to their own logic. Or at least that's the sense that you're going to that's the impression that you're going to get when you're speaking to someone that's ENFP, is that they're going to focus on more emotional content than logical content when you're talking to them. If you've known someone that's ENFP for a while and you've seen them in different environments, as I've said before, so maybe you know one of these people at work, but you also have a personal relationship with them and you know them outside of work, you're going to notice that they're going to be prone to philosophical self-reflection a lot of the time. And it's a strange thing where they're talking about things that are very far removed from what you're doing, but it's also surprisingly concrete at the same time. Or at least the ways in which their reflections are concrete are surprising. There are also the type of reflections where it's not super serious like you'd expect from someone that's INFP or INFJ, where you can follow it up with like a damn that's crazy, because they don't really they already are aware when they're doing it, or I don't know if they're aware when they're doing it, but this is what you'll get the sense that when they do one of these very introspective reflections, they'll come out of it and they'll kind of bring the conversation back to a creative realm where everything's not too serious and you're having fun again. That's what you'll notice a lot of the time. To recap, when you're typing someone that's ENFP, you're going to be looking for someone that is able to really captivate you with interesting discussion. Their discussion is also going to be usually very opinionated and passionate. You're also looking for someone that will occasionally engage in grounded self-reflection on emotional content, and usually something that has to do with the emotional well-being of other people. The bullseye on top of all those things, with at least these observations that you can look out for. I'll probably be making other videos about additional observations you can make. But the real bullseye and the real key is that this person is probably going to avoid making very strict logical definitions. So they're not going to be putting very many logical boundaries on what they're speaking about. Again, we're looking for someone that is ideas driven, passionate, and then also very insightful and affirming of other people from time to time. And then on top of that, we're looking for someone that doesn't really like to go very deep into logical definitions. Clips for this video, in terms of ENFP, we're going to be looking at Will Smith and Russell Brand. So actor Will Smith, and then I guess also, and actor Russell Brand, actor-comedian Russell Brand.
How you're interacting with people in the process, and the concept of improving lives runs through the center of everything I do. And then I realized that the way to improve lives is to continually improve yourself, right? So with that, every morning when I get out of the bed, I haven't fixed everything in the world yet, so there's always something to do. And in this film, I read an interesting quote. For the Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, he said that good people have to get out of the bed every day and try to empty the ocean with a ladle, right? And I thought that was, I knew that was profound, and I paused for a second, and I said, all right, what the hell is a ladle, right? Right, so then, I touched it on my iPad as ladle.
And then acting, and then politics and activism. When you're doing all that, is it confusing? It is. Well, that's my question. Is it hard to get back into stand-up headspace?
Well, no, not for me, Waleed, because I tell you why. Because for me, all things must come from a centre of truth. Whether you're doing this interview here on the project, or doing stand-up comedy, or making love to a fine-looking woman in hope of a second child. Do it from the place in you that is true, from the place that in you is real. From some ideologies, you would call it God, or Allah, or Vishnu, or whatever. But for me, it's that essence. Behind your personal identity, we are connected to greatness. All of us feel it in silence, the quiet voice of wonder present in us all. You can use that in comedy, you can use it anywhere. Even great athletes use it. Who's that crazy tennis kid you've got now?
Nick Kyrgios.
Kyrgios, that he's coming from somewhere deep. He's deep, that player.
Have there been times in your life where you've lost that? You felt like you've lost it?
Yes, I lose it every day.
Moving on to ENTP. Someone that's ENTP is also going to really enjoy exploratory conversation and creative conversation on topics that you probably haven't heard of. Like the less people that have heard of what they're talking about, the better it is for them. Those are the topics they really like the most. Just like you would expect from someone that's ENFP. However, the difference here is that someone that's ENTP is going to be talking to you in terms of personal logic. So, although very exploratory conversation is going to be something that you're going to notice first when you're talking to someone that's ENTP, and it's going to be the most apparent thing you'll notice. If you've known someone that's ENTP for a while, or just like I said with ENFP, if you've seen them in a variety of different environments, then you're probably going to notice that they like to self-reflect on technical information. So whereas I was saying before that ENFPs will from time to time share inner reflections or introspections with you about emotional content, ENTPs are going to do something similar with technical information. Another facet of behavior here with ENTP is that someone that's ENTP will probably avoid stating their own personal opinion when it comes to whatever factual information they're talking about. So they might have a lot of practical knowledge that they've reflected on, and they'll share that with you. They're not really going to want to share their personal opinion with you. So it may be like pulling teeth to get out a personal judgment from them. Or at least this is likely to be the case with a personal emotional judgment. Just like ENFPs also, you'll notice that there's very stark contrast in your abstract conversation between something that's very in the clouds, abstract, versus something that's very concrete. It's almost like they spend 95% of the time when they're doing these self-reflections, like 95% of the time is introspection and like space cadet kind of stuff, where it's not really having to do with something that's real at all. But 5% of the time, they'll give you some kind of concrete observation that you can't really just shirk off like the other things they say. So they'll give you something that you can really grab onto in terms of sensation, or an observation that was made via sensation. To recap, you're going to be looking for someone that has very captivating ideas, just like someone that's ENFP. So, like an ENFP might be, I don't know, they might be your friend that notices something about your other friends, and in an emotional sense, and they tell you that they tell you how other people are getting along, probably better than they know themselves, or they can tell you kind of cool stories about your friends that you never would have guessed. And it's like they don't have much experience with these people, but they just have like a kind of a hunch. That's someone that that's an indication that you're talking to somebody that's ENFP. Somebody that's ENTP, it's way more logical. So they'll come up with ideas that are very far out there, just like someone that's ENFP. But they've been actually thinking about these ideas in terms of very strict rules. So, while the way you can kind of tell the difference is that someone that's ENFP, their kind of out there ideas will have an emotional flow that makes sense. So there's an emotional structure to it, whereas someone that's ENTP has a logical structure to their ideas. And when you ask someone that's ENFP to start making strict definitions and be very concise with their logic, they're probably not going to want to do that so much. And the opposite is true with someone that's ENTP. Whereas an ENTP will talk your head off about a lot of logical stuff, and they'll talk your head off about a lot of theories that are maybe scientific or maybe something in engineering. But if you get them to a point where you really want them to express their opinion on it, or how they feel emotionally about what you're talking about, you're not really going to get a desired answer. You're not going to get something that you would be able to make a structure out of in the same way that you would from someone that's ENFP. Celebs we're going to be looking at for ENTP are Bill Nye, so science communicator Bill Nye, and theoretical physicist Richard Feynman. Keep in mind here, we're looking for someone that entertains a lot of different ideas in terms of logic, but at the same time, they'll like to engage in very grounded self-reflection on technical topics and practicality of different technical methods. And they're not really going to be making so many emotional judgments. So they're going to be skirting around the topic of their personal opinion, even when they're talking about something that might even require their personal opinion to seem complete.
We build instruments to measure time outside of ourselves, externally. But it is a great question. And then the whole idea of science really started with this thing people used to call natural philosophy. And when you throw in the word philosophy, for me, you start asking this question, like, can you know anything, let alone what time it is, or how long it's been since something happened, or whether or not, or when something will happen in the future, or whether or not it'll happen at all. These are philosophical questions, and I feel that you can get yourself pretty spun up in saying to yourself, there's no way to know anything. You can philosophically, you can't know anything. On the other hand, it seems to me we can know a great deal objectively about nature, and that includes time and its passage.
In between. It isn't just a lot of dots separated by little distances. Or they say, you know those quantum mechanical amplitudes that you told me about, they're so complicated and absurd. What makes you think those are right? Maybe they aren't right. I get a lot of letters with such content, but I must say that such remarks are perfectly obvious and are perfectly clear to anybody who's working on this problem, and it doesn't do any good to point this out. The problem is not what might be wrong, but what might be substituted precisely in place of it. If you say anything precise, for example, in the case of a continuous space, suppose the precise proposition is that space really consists of a series of dots only, and the space between them doesn't mean anything, and the dots are in a cubic array. Then we can prove that immediately is wrong. That doesn't work. You see, the problem is not to change or to say something might be wrong, but to replace it by something, and that is not so easy. As soon as any real, definite idea is substituted, it becomes almost immediately apparent that it doesn't work.